You think you can just walk past me? The words cut through the humid morning air, sharp and incredulous, coming from a young airman whose boots crunched against the asphalt with every step, his eyes darting toward the old man standing near the runway. Robert Hayes, 82 years old, his white hair catching the early sunlight, stood quietly beside a faded orange windsock, his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn olive jacket. The hum of distant engines filled the air, but his gaze remained fixed on the sleek black form of the B-2 Spirit parked just beyond the taxiway, unmoving yet commanding attention. James Jimmy Cooper, a fresh second lieutenant, barely out of flight school, laughed under his breath, nudging his fellow airmen, all 22 and brimming with overconfidence, as if daring them to question his authority. "Sir, you need to move along. This area is restricted," Jimmy said, his tone laced with irritation, the badge on his chest glinting under the sun like a shield of unearned confidence. Robert didn't flinch. His pale blue eyes scanned the airfield with a calm precision that made the young men shift uncomfortably. The wind teased the edges of his jacket, the fabric worn soft from decades of sun and wind, yet he carried himself with a subtle dignity that belied his age. "I'm here for the B-2 crew," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of unspoken history. Jimmy snorted, stepping closer, gloved fingers tapping the dull metal pinned crookedly to Robert's lapel. You got that out of a cereal box, old man." The mockery hung in the air, sharp and unnecessary, and a group of airmen nearby stifled laughs, their eyes flicking between the veteran and the young lieutenant. Robert's gaze followed the badge, and in that split second, the world shifted. The roar of engines and the glare of sunlight melted away, replaced by a humid, shadowed hangar in Southeast Asia decades ago. Rain pounded on a corrugated roof, mud squelched beneath his boots, and the air smelled of wet earth and oil. A young pilot, face streaked with soot and fear, handed him a worn metal plate. "Keep this," the pilot rasped, his voice trembling. "It's not regulation, but it will mean more than anything they'll ever issue you." Robert took the plate into his weathered hands, feeling the weight of every life he'd shielded and every decision made in silence. The vision dissolved as quickly as it appeared, leaving the pale runway and the smirking faces of the airmen. A flicker of resolve sparked in Robert's eyes. He stepped forward, his stride measured, each footfall deliberate on the tarmac, the wind catching his jacket and sending it billowing softly around his legs. Ethan Parker, a young B-2 pilot observing from the cockpit line, noticed the old man's calm, the way he absorbed the youthful arrogance like a solid wall. Subtly, Ethan tapped his comms, speaking low into his headset, summoning Colonel Mitchell, a four-star whose presence commanded immediate attention. The distant rumble of jet engines seemed to hush as the colonel appeared, walking briskly across the runway, eyes narrowing at the sight of Robert. With a hand raised, the B-2 crew climbed down from their aircraft in unison, their movements precise, deliberate, as if the veteran's presence alone demanded respect. Jimmy and the other airmen froze mid-step, boots planted firmly, eyes wide as the crew saluted, a ripple of acknowledgement washing over the tarmac. Robert's lips curved into a faint smile, unassuming yet powerful, his body straightening as decades of quiet service radiated in the still air. The wind shifted, lifting loose gravel and papers, and in that single, suspended moment, authority, experience, and silent valor had spoken louder than any command, leaving the young airmen standing in stunned silence as the B-2 crew maintained their salute, the hum of the runway fading into a profound quiet that honored a lifetime of unseen deeds. Robert adjusted the straps of his worn leather bag, the sun casting long shadows across the tarmac, the hum of distant jet engines fading into the background as the B-2 crew maintained their precise formation. He surveyed the sleek aircraft, noting every seam and panel as if reading a familiar book, his pale blue eyes calm but alert, each detail a reminder of missions flown and lives safeguarded decades ago. Jimmy Cooper and his fellow airmen remained frozen, the weight of the salute pressing upon them in a way that words never could, the heat rising under their flight suits now mingled with an unfamiliar humility. Ethan Parker stepped closer to Robert, his own pulse quickening, his hands hovering near the comms as he debated whether to speak or simply observe the unfolding moment. Robert shifted slightly, the wind tugging gently at his jacket, and for a heartbeat, the modern runway dissolved. He was back in a distant desert, the sun scorching and relentless, the horizon a blur of sand and dust, and yet he moved with the same deliberate calm, checking instruments, coordinating movements, and ensuring every life under his watch was accounted for. The memory faded, replaced by the crisp morning air, the sight of the B-2 casting long black shadows across the concrete, each crew member frozen in a salute that seemed to stretch time. Robert approached the edge of the aircraft, his steps deliberate, each one measured and grounded, the faint scrape of his shoes on asphalt punctuating the quiet. He reached out to the plane, lightly resting a hand on its surface, feeling the cold metal hum beneath his fingers as though it acknowledged his presence, a silent recognition of decades of service and expertise. Jimmy's mouth opened slightly, then closed, the arrogance replaced by a dawning respect that he could not articulate, his eyes meeting Robert's in a moment of unspoken understanding. The B-2 crew, still in formation, allowed a subtle shift in stance, a silent nod that reinforced the veteran's authority without a single word. The coordination and discipline of decades of training now aligned with the quiet command radiating from Robert. Ethan Parker lowered his hand from the comms, feeling the tension ease slightly, yet the gravity of the situation lingered, the air thick with a respect that had been earned rather than demanded. Robert's gaze swept the runway, noting the arrangement of vehicles and personnel, his attention to detail as sharp as it had ever been, and yet his expression remained serene, a gentle acknowledgement of his own limitations alongside the recognition of the crew's capabilities. He turned slightly to look at Jimmy, the young airman's posture stiff but gradually loosening, a subtle nod of approval passing between them, bridging the gap of decades and experience. The wind shifted again, lifting a loose piece of paper from the ground, and Robert bent slightly to catch it, a simple act that held the same precision and care as any maneuver in a flight operation, the small movement echoing across the tarmac like a quiet declaration of his presence. The B-2 crew slowly lowered their salute, the rhythm of the moment unbroken, each motion deliberate, maintaining a decorum that spoke louder than any command or reprimand could. Robert exhaled, the sound soft but deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of the subtle power held in composure, observation, and experience. The young airman, still standing, now felt the weight of history in the still morning air, the realization settling that respect could not be rushed or feigned, but must be recognized, and in that recognition, Robert Hayes, the quiet veteran, had silently reaffirmed his place on the runway, among the aircraft, and in the memory of every observer present. The hum of the runway returned to a soft background drone as Robert Hayes stepped away from the B-2, his hand brushing lightly over the aircraft's surface, feeling the cold metal thrum beneath his fingertips as if acknowledging the silent connection between veteran and crew. He walked toward the edge of the taxiway, eyes scanning the horizon, noting the alignment of vehicles and personnel with meticulous precision, the gravel crunching faintly under his worn leather shoes. Jimmy Cooper and the other airmen lingered, unsure whether to move or speak, their previous bravado replaced by a measured caution, each exhaling in small, controlled bursts as the weight of the veteran's presence pressed on them. Ethan Parker followed Robert with a subtle distance, his own pulse steadying, intrigued by the quiet confidence and calm authority that seemed to radiate without effort. Robert paused, reaching into his jacket pocket and retrieving a small notebook, its leather cover scuffed and softened from years of use, flipping it open with deliberate care and tracing the lines of entries that recorded missions, observations, and insights from decades past. The morning sun reflected off the polished edges of the notebook, glinting briefly before settling into the worn textures of ink and paper, a testament to careful attention and experience. Across the tarmac, the B-2 crew continued to maintain a respectful posture, their attention unwavering, a subtle choreography that emphasized the veteran's influence without a word exchanged. Robert lowered himself onto a low concrete barrier, adjusting the position of his bag, and gazed across the runway, noting the subtle movements of airfield personnel, their steps and gestures revealing layers of coordination and discipline that had been honed over years, now observed through the lens of his practiced eyes. Jimmy shifted slightly, the gravel beneath his boots sliding with a faint scrape, his breath uneven as he tried to reconcile the confident poise of the old man with the authority of the crew and the unspoken acknowledgement that had passed between Robert and Ethan Parker. The veteran opened the notebook and pointed casually toward a series of numbers and diagrams, each representing fuel loads, wind trajectories, and engine checks, his fingers steady despite age, drawing lines that connected past operations to present readiness. Ethan leaned closer, intrigued by the seamless blending of memory and current observation, his own training giving way to curiosity, the young lieutenant's eyebrows lifting as he registered the veteran's depth of knowledge. Across the field, the B-2 engines remained silent, their shadows stretching long in the morning light, a silent chorus of readiness and precision as Robert traced a final line in his notebook, closing it with a soft snap, the sound resonating faintly in the quiet morning. Jimmy, unable to look away, finally straightened, shoulders tightening as respect, unspoken yet profound, filled the space between them, a tangible acknowledgement that the veteran's authority had been earned long before the first step on the runway. Robert turned his gaze toward Ethan Parker, a faint nod passing between them, a silent communication of understanding, competence, and the quiet pride of decades served without need for applause. The wind stirred once more, lifting a loose sheet of paper from the runway edge, and Robert bent to catch it with practiced ease, pocketing it with the same care and attention he had given every detail, every procedure, every lesson learned across a lifetime. The crew of the B-2, having observed every movement, relaxed slightly yet remained vigilant, the rhythm of salute and respect lingering in their posture, a delicate acknowledgement of discipline meeting experience. The young airmen, now fully present in the moment, exhaled collectively, the initial tension replaced by a heavy, measured respect, the morning air carrying a quiet reverence that spoke louder than any spoken word, affirming Robert Hayes' place not only among the aircraft but in the memory and acknowledgement of every observer present. Robert stepped back from the edge of the runway, letting the sun illuminate the lines of his weathered face, the soft breeze ruffling the worn fabric of his jacket. The B-2 crew had returned to their positions, yet each movement carried a subtle acknowledgement of the veteran's authority, a rhythm established without a single spoken word. Ethan Parker remained nearby, observing the interplay between decades of experience and the structured precision of the crew, his own posture mirroring the respect that seemed to radiate from Robert like a quiet aura. The airfield, usually filled with the clatter of footsteps and distant engine hums, seemed suspended in a fragile balance, each sound amplified against the quiet of the morning, emphasizing the stillness that hung over the tarmac. Robert moved toward a small utility cart station near the runway, his hands brushing the metal with familiarity, noting minor imperfections and ensuring alignment, as though preparing for a procedure only he could fully appreciate. Jimmy Cooper and the younger airman exchanged glances, the tension between uncertainty and admiration building invisibly as they witnessed the calm deliberation in every movement of the veteran. Robert knelt briefly to examine a panel near the nose gear of the aircraft, his fingers tracing the outline of fasteners, the surface cool under touch, a testament to both careful maintenance and decades of knowledge that had been internalized through countless missions and meticulous attention to detail. Ethan Parker stepped closer, lowering his voice to speak quietly, observing Robert's methodical assessment without interfering, each motion of the veteran unfolding like a demonstration of competence and silent command. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and asphalt, and Robert's gaze swept across the lineup of support vehicles and crew, registering patterns, noting deviations, and mentally preparing contingencies that reflected a lifetime of understanding complex operations. A small gust lifted a loose document from the edge of the runway, and Robert's hand moved instinctively, catching it with ease, smoothing it flat, and pocketing it with the same deliberate care that had guided his every action. Jimmy's posture slackened imperceptibly, His previous bravado diminished under the weight of the veteran's understated authority, the quiet competence challenging assumptions and reshaping perceptions without a single overt display of power. Robert stood, straightening slowly, letting the morning light highlight the textures of his jacket, the subtle folds worn soft with age, and the pale clarity of his eyes that had witnessed decades of missions and discipline. Ethan Parker nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the depth and precision he observed, understanding that the veteran's influence extended beyond rank or title into a realm defined by skill, composure, and earned respect. Across the runway, the B-2 crew adjusted their stance subtly, a graceful, almost imperceptible shift that maintained the unspoken decorum of the moment, their movements reinforcing the veteran's presence and the authority silently recognized. Robert glanced back toward the young airman, his expression calm, yet piercing, each feature conveying a quiet message that respect is granted through experience, observation, and integrity, not demanded through words or gestures. The morning sun climbed higher, shadows shortening, yet the pause in motion and the weight of recognition lingered in the air, a measured, deliberate respect that settled over the tarmac and the observers alike, marking the veteran's quiet but undeniable command of the space, his authority validated by action, history, and silent acknowledgement. Robert adjusted his stance, the concrete of the runway firm beneath his worn leather shoes, feeling the slight unevenness of the surface with every deliberate step, the morning sun glinting off the black steel of the B-2 reflecting patterns of light across his lined face. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and warm asphalt, carrying a soft hum that seemed almost musical against the stillness of the crew maintaining their positions, every movement deliberate and precise. Ethan Parker observed from a few paces back, his own posture reflecting a mixture of curiosity and respect, noting how Robert's eyes scanned every detail with the practiced precision of decades spent interpreting machines, weather patterns, and human behavior. Jimmy Cooper remained frozen, the earlier arrogance replaced by a tight, careful focus, the reality of experience and earned respect settling into the spaces between his thoughts. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and extracted a small, scuffed field notebook, flipping it open with fingers that had grown slightly stiff with age yet moved with unbroken precision, tracing lines that mapped wind trajectories, runway measurements, and observations from years of operational experience. His voice, calm and steady, cut through the ambient sound as he spoke quietly to Ethan, pointing to a subtle mark on the tarmac, a place where minor imperfections could have consequences if overlooked, his words measured, deliberate, and rich with authority. Ethan nodded, impressed by the depth of insight embedded in even the simplest observation, recognizing the blend of memory, expertise, and foresight that informed Robert's every decision. The B-2 crew subtly shifted stance, a small acknowledgement of the veterans' presence and competence, their discipline and focus adding weight to every silent gesture. A light gust of wind lifted a thin piece of paper from a nearby clipboard, and Robert bent slightly, catching it with practiced ease, smoothing it flat against the surface before slipping it back into the notebook, a small but deliberate motion that carried the weight of decades of training and experience. Jimmy and the other airmen watched, their expressions softening, the rigid posture of youthful certainty giving way to a quiet recognition of authority earned through time, attention, and skill. Robert straightened, exhaling slowly, his gaze sweeping across the runway and the aircraft lined along the tarmac, noting the subtle interactions of personnel and machines, the way each element moved with a rhythm that reflected preparation, coordination, and silent expertise. Ethan Parker's eyes followed every movement, understanding that the quiet command of the veteran was more potent than any shouted order, a demonstration of respect, discipline, and the weight of experience manifested without spectacle. Across the runway, the shadows of the B-2 stretched long in the rising sun, each panel an edge highlighting the contrast between modern precision and the veteran's accumulated mastery of operational awareness. Robert turned slightly, meeting Jimmy's gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible nod conveying approval, understanding, and recognition, bridging the gap between age and youth, experience, and learning, the moment stretching without sound, yet filled with the quiet resonance of earned respect, discipline, and the subtle power of a lifetime of unseen diligence. The air seemed to hold its breath as the veteran stepped back, adjusting his jacket, the weight of every observation and decision settling like a tangible presence across the runway. The hum of engines and the whisper of the wind framing a tableau of authority, competence, and unspoken acknowledgement that no words could enhance. A moment suspended where history, skill, and silent valor converged on the asphalt and in the minds of all who observed. Robert paused near the edge of the tarmac, letting the morning light outline the contours of his face, the subtle lines speaking of decades spent in service and quiet vigilance. The B-2 crew remained still, their formation disciplined, each glance and shift of weight a silent acknowledgement of the veteran's presence, an unspoken affirmation of experience meeting precision. Ethan Parker stood a few steps behind, his eyes tracing the veteran's movements with a mix of admiration and careful calculation, understanding that the calm composure and measured steps carried more authority than any spoken order could convey. Jimmy Cooper and the other young airmen shuffled slightly, the tightness in their shoulders easing only marginally as they registered the quiet but undeniable power in Robert's demeanor, the kind that comes from long years of earned knowledge and steadfast commitment. Robert reached for the notebook he had returned to his jacket, flipping it open to a page marked with careful notes, diagrams, and numerical observations, the kind that told a story of meticulous planning and attention to detail developed over a lifetime. He pointed out subtle markings on the runway, adjustments in the alignment of support vehicles, and minor variances in wind direction that might affect operations, his fingers steady, deliberate, and precise, moving with a confidence born of years observing, calculating, and responding to complex scenarios. Ethan leaned in, absorbing the information with quiet respect, noting how each gesture, each observation, carried the weight of experience that no manual or database could replicate. The air was still except for the distant hum of aircraft engines, yet every subtle sound seemed magnified against the silence of anticipation, the gravel beneath the airmen's boots shifting softly as they took in the demonstration of calm command. Robert traced a line from one end of the runway to the other with a steady hand, his movements thoughtful, almost ceremonial, each step measured and deliberate, the rhythm of his actions reinforcing the quiet authority he wielded effortlessly. The B-2 crew subtly adjusted, a slight nod here, a straightening of posture there, all in recognition of the veteran's presence and attention, their actions synchronized without a single verbal exchange, the choreography of respect and discipline unfolding seamlessly. Jimmy's gaze followed, Robert with increasing awareness, the earlier levity replaced by a burgeoning understanding of the depth of skill, judgment, and patience that the veteran brought to every observation and action. Robert's eyes swept the horizon, taking in the entire field, the alignment of aircraft, the spacing of personnel, and the subtle shifts of wind and light, every detail processed, acknowledged, and filed with meticulous care. A light breeze lifted a piece of paper from the edge of a nearby console, and Robert bent slightly, retrieving it with ease, smoothing it flat, and returning it to the notebook, a simple motion imbued with the weight of decades of careful observation and deliberate movement. He stood upright once more, surveying the airfield with a calm, assured gaze, his presence anchoring the space, his quiet command settling over the personnel and machinery alike. Ethan exhaled slowly, recognizing the quiet lesson unfolding before him, the blending of knowledge, patience, and authority that required no assertion beyond observation and action. Jimmy's posture eased further, the tension in his shoulders softening as he absorbed the implicit understanding of respect, skill, and discipline that the veteran had demonstrated with each unspoken gesture and deliberate movement. Across the runway, the shadows of the B-2 stretched long and sharp, emphasizing the interplay of light, form, and presence as Robert Hayes moved with quiet precision, a living testament to experience, insight, and the undeniable power of silent mastery in a world designed for speed and noise. The morning air held a weightless stillness, the subtle hum of engines fading into background resonance, leaving only the measured rhythm of the veteran's actions and the acknowledgement of those who watched. Each motion a silent declaration of authority earned through decades of service, observation, and unwavering attention to detail. Robert shifted his weight slightly, the soles of his shoes brushing faintly against the asphalt as he turned his gaze toward the distant hangar where the B-2 crew had parked, the sunlight catching the edges of the aircraft and scattering a subtle reflection across his lined features. The morning air was still, carrying only the distant hum of engines and the soft whisper of wine through the tarmac lights. Yet within that calm, a tension lingered, palpable to those standing nearby. Ethan Parker stepped closer, keeping a careful distance, observing the veteran's deliberate movements and the careful rhythm with which he scanned the field, noting every vehicle, every piece of equipment, and every subtle motion of the personnel. Jimmy Cooper's arms remained crossed, his previous confidence tempered by the silent authority radiating from Robert, his posture shifting subtly as he registered the veteran's attention to detail and unspoken command of the space. Robert bent down slightly to examine the alignment of a service card, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the metal, each movement precise, methodical, reflecting a familiarity and competence honed over decades of service. The B-2 crew maintained their poised stance, subtle shifts of body and attention echoing the veteran's focus, their formation a quiet tribute to discipline and acknowledgement of experience. Robert's hand rested momentarily on the edge of the aircraft, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertips, and he drew in a measured breath, eyes scanning the horizon, the light glinting off his notebook tucked into his jacket, a repository of countless observations and notes that spoke to meticulous preparation. Ethan watched the subtle coordination, the unspoken language of recognition between the veteran and the crew, understanding that every tilt of the head, every pause, every micro-movement carried meaning and authority far beyond words. Jimmy's gaze flicked to the horizon, catching sight of minor details that Robert had noted, small imperfections in alignment and spacing, the veteran's attention to nuance drawing an unspoken lesson in observation and care. Robert straightened, adjusting the jacket across his shoulders, his presence commanding without demand, a quiet demonstration of skill and experience that pressed gently but firmly upon all who watched. A faint breeze lifted a loose sheet of paper from the edge of the tarmac, and Robert's hand moved instinctively, catching it and slipping it back into the notebook, a gesture precise and unhurried, reflecting the same deliberate care that had guided his career. The shadows of the B-2 stretched long across the runway, accentuating the veteran's calm presence and the structured posture of the crew, the contrast of light and shadow reinforcing the gravity of the moment without a single word spoken. Robert turned his head slightly toward Jimmy and Ethan, his expression calm, eyes steady, conveying recognition, authority, and approval, bridging the gap between experience and inexperience, youth and wisdom. The morning light shifted, glinting on instruments, metal edges, and the pale blue of Robert's eyes, casting a subtle clarity over the tarmac as the hum of distant engines and the faint stir of wind framed a tableau of earned respect, quiet mastery, and the profound acknowledgement that some authority is felt, not commanded, leaving the air charged with the resonance of decades of service and the silent power of unspoken competence. Robert took a deep, measured breath, the morning light catching the edges of his jacket and the subtle wrinkles of his hands as he surveyed the tarmac. The B-2 parked silently with its sleek black wings casting long, defined shadows across the concrete. The quiet precision of the crew remained, each member's stance disciplined, eyes flicking occasionally toward the veteran with acknowledgement, yet no unnecessary movement, their collective posture an unspoken testament to respect and understanding. Ethan Parker stayed slightly behind, absorbing the subtleties of Robert's actions, noting how each step, each tilt of the head, and each deliberate glance communicated authority without a word, a demonstration of presence shaped by decades of expertise. Jimmy Cooper shifted lightly on the gravel, his earlier impatience replaced by careful observation, the realization settling in that experience and knowledge could command attention far more effectively than rank or bravado. Robert bent slightly to examine a small console near the aircraft, fingers tracing lines and edges with methodical care, noting minute adjustments that might be required for precision. The hum of distant engines serving as a muted backdrop to his focused movements. A slight breeze stirred the loose papers at the edge of the runway, and Robert instinctively caught them, smoothing each one with deliberate, practiced motions before returning them to his notebook, the gesture reflecting the same discipline and thoughtfulness that had guided his actions throughout a lifetime of service. Across the tarmac, the B-2 crew mirrored a subtle shift, a nod of acknowledgement here, a minute adjustment there, reinforcing the silent dialogue between veteran and team, their coordination both disciplined and respectful. Robert's eyes scanned the horizon, catching small details, the placement of vehicles, the spacing of crew members, and subtle cues in the environment, each observation reinforcing the veteran's quiet command over the space. Ethan Parker exhaled slowly, recognizing the lesson unfolding before him, understanding that authority and respect were not claimed through volume or force, but demonstrated through attention, consistency, and the careful application of knowledge. Jimmy's posture eased further, his stance now reflecting a growing appreciation of the veteran's composure and expertise, the tension in his shoulders softening under the weight of recognition. Robert stepped back, letting his gaze sweep over the entire field, taking in the alignment of aircraft, crew, and equipment, and in the stillness of the morning, the veteran's presence grounded the space, a subtle yet undeniable assertion of experience and mastery. The sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the runway, highlighting the textures of the concrete, the metal of the aircraft, and the lined features of Robert's face, emphasizing the quiet dignity of someone whose authority is earned and recognized without ceremony. Ethan Parker's eyes followed every movement, understanding that the silent command of the veteran carried a gravity that words could not convey, each action deliberate, each motion measured, a testament to competence and earned respect. The young airmen, standing at various points along the tarmac, remained attentive, absorbing the demonstration of quiet mastery. Their own movements slowed, deliberate, and measured as they mirrored the veteran's calm presence. The runway seemed to hold its breath, the hum of distant engines fading, leaving only the steady rhythm of Robert's deliberate motions, the faint rustle of papers, and the subtle shift of light and shadow across the field, a tableau of earned authority, silent command, and the enduring power of presence shaped by decades of service and observation.